The notice of the expropriation was waiting for Simon first thing Monday morning. It came, opened as usual, through Wendy. It was the first time he'd seen her since the last shoot of Omni, and he studied her face closely as to her mood. "It's bad news, Simon." Simon nodded. "I've had some advance warning." Wendy shrugged. "What can I say? I'm sorry. You guys did a great job." There was this long, awkward silence, during which time Simon ransacked his mind. He'd been searching for her all week. What had he been planning to say? Why couldn't he say it now? As she looked as though she were about to walk away, he blurted, "I thought you were really terrific in Nathan's movie the other day." She smiled, and for one fraction of a second, Simon was at least 40% positive that he saw a flush in her cheeks. Suddenly she said, "I've got to go to class. See you later." She hurried off, leaving him in no position to ponder the symbolic meaning of their meeting. The town letter was in his hands, and it took priority over everything. Well, here it was, the divine word of Interflux, via the town of Greenbush, all in black and white. At noon Friday, lot 1346B once again became town property. And at 12:05, Simon knew the Interflux bulldozers would be rolling over the spot where the Antiflux Cultural Center and Worm Shop had once been. Good old Cyril Irving never reneged on a promise. 4 short months ago, it had brought Simon a new car. Now it was bringing him possibly the biggest problem of his life. How to break the news to Antiflux's 1,500-odd faithful that it was all over. One look at Dave Roper heading dutifully out to his worm store served to drive home the message that there were a lot of students who weren't going to take this well. A meeting would be the only way, otherwise it would spread through the school like gossip and end up blown up all out of proportion. At a big assembly, he could let everyone know at the same time. The question remained, would he be able to find the right words to soften the blow if it was bound to be a major disappointment? And would there be any trouble? He sat through a couple of classes with the result that it only clogged up his brain with too much input, threatening an overload. There was no time for education. He had to think. Maybe he'd go out to the cultural center and think there. There was a play in progress outside behind the big tent, an all-Nassau Arts production, written by one of the school's top playwrights and performed by the acting department. The audience consisted of 3 classes of bussed-in 7th graders and a sprinkling of adults, some of them teachers. Reaction seemed very positive. There was laughter and some applause from the students, and the adults were chuckling at some of the better one-liners. But the best response of all was coming from one man in the back row, doubled over with mirth, clapping wildly and cheering between guffaws. He was a handsome young fellow, with a touch of the dashing hero look, very stylishly dressed. Simon's breath caught in his throat. It was Kyle Montrose. What was the flake doing at the Antiflux Cultural Center? Simon rushed over. "Mr. Montrose, hello, what brings you here?" "Simon!" Montrose exclaimed in sudden recognition. "How are you? You've grown up into quite a lad." Simon noticed a hint of champagne on the billionaire's breath. "I'm fine, Mr. Montrose. How are you?" "Never better. I'll be with you in a minute. I must see the end of this absolutely brilliant piece of satire." Later, when the play was over, and he'd bravoed himself hoarse and congratulated all the cast, Montrose walked with Simon back to the school building. "Does my father know you're here?" Simon asked. "Certainly not. If he'd known I was coming, would have done his utmost to prevent it. Quite a bully, your father. I came because I received a call from someone here that Interflux was having trouble with a group called Antiflux. So about a month later, I caught the first plane out of Auckland to New York, and the cab driver told the cab driver to take me to Antiflux in Greenbush, and he dropped me off here. Didn't find Antiflux, but there was this terrific play going on. Then you came along, and here I am." Simon held the large fire door open for the Interflux president. "I think we should find a payphone and tell my father the good news that you're here." Mr. Irving had to be called out of a meeting, so while Simon waited on the phone, Montrose lost interest in the call and began to browse around the halls, viewing exhibits of the students' work and peering inside open doors. "Son, what's the emergency?" Simon grinned. "Hi, Dad! You'll never guess who's with me here at school right now." "Simon, I don't have time for guessing games. My secretary said this was urgent. What's going on?" Mr. Montrose is here. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You mean the flake? Oh my god, how? Never mind, I know how. One of my ninnies must have panicked and phoned him about your Interflux. Yeah, I knew this was gonna happen. Surprised he didn't show up a month ago. You want me to bring him over to Interflux, Dad? Good God, no! Under no circumstances is the flake to come anywhere near this office. Simon chuckled. If you let me keep my land, I'll consider not bringing Mr. Montrose over right now. That's not funny, Simon. Don't be an idiot. Now ease him out of there before he starts something. Has he been drinking at all? I think it was a champagne flight. Terrific. Bring him home to our place. Under no circumstances are you allowed to check into a hotel or go anywhere except our house. I'll phone your mother and tell her to be ready with the coffee, and I'll be home myself as soon as I can get away. Hold the fort, son. What about my classes? Tell him you've got a terrible disease! It'll be the truth! Tell him your father's on the ledge of his office window! That'll be the truth, too! Tell them anything, but get him out of there! Okay, Dad, I'll do my best. Simon hung up and hurried out into the hall. Montrose was gone. In alarm, Simon ran up and down the long corridor, looking desperately in the window of each classroom door. He didn't know Mr. Montrose very well, but if he went by his father's evaluation, having the man loose in Nassau Arts was a catastrophe beyond anyone's wildest nightmares. Just when Simon was about to panic completely, he caught sight of Montrose in one of the studios conducting a dance class. So as I was saying, ladies, your instructor is still very ill today, and I'm taking over your session. You may call me Kyle. Now, I thought we'd start off with a few warm-up exercises and get right down to business. Simon burst into the studio like a bomb, grabbed Montrose by the arm, and began hauling him bodily out the door. There was some booing from the girls, and a few of them threw slippers at Simon. Same time tomorrow, Montrose called to his classes. Remember to practice what we've learned. To Simon, he said in a vaguely reproachful tone, I was having a good time. I'm sorry, Mr. Montrose, but my father says we have to go home. Well, yes, of course he does, but what Cyril doesn't know, what won't hurt him, he turned glum. The only problem is there's nothing Cyril doesn't know. That's why I spend so much time in places like Europe and Asia. You see, Cyril doesn't approve of my lifestyle. He thinks I'm a bum. He's right, you know, but naturally that doesn't mean anything. He's going to come home early to see you, Mr. Montrose. All right, Simon, but first, could you maybe show me around this wonderful school of yours? I forgot you were a painter, and some of the work here is really first-rate. Simon gave him a brief tour of the school and the cultural center before loading him into the Firebird and heading home, where Mrs. Irving was stationed with the coffee. Ah, announced Kyle Montrose with satisfaction. That was a wonderful dinner. Thank you, Mary. Mr. Irving leaned over to his son. For us, beans and greens, for the flake beef Wellington. Lovely to have you, Kyle, Mrs. Irving beamed. We don't see enough of you. A strangled sound escaped Mr. Irving as he applied himself to his peach melba. All through the meal, the Interflux president had spoken on no other subject besides how impressed he was by Simon's school. Obviously, dessert was going to be no different. The talent, he raved, the magnificence, the maturity is inconceivable for kids that age. Cyril, you must be enormously proud to have a son with the ability to be accepted by this wonderful school. Simon has done a lot since he came to Nassau Arts, said Mr. Irving with a crooked grin. That school has better artwork sitting in the back corners collecting dust than any I've seen in some of the greatest museums of the world. Why, this one storeroom had hidden away in the cupboard the most creative and insightful piece of work it's ever been my privilege to see. I'm going to have to speak to someone about getting to meet the talented young person who produced Technicolor wheat. Simon choked on his peach melba. Montrose was still warming to his subject. And that cultural center is a stroke of genius. I really enjoyed myself there. It has everything, culture and entertainment. You may be seeing more of me because I think I'm going to stay around for a couple of weeks and drink in all the cultural center has to offer. Simon looked at his father as though to say, it's your expropriation, you tell him. Kyle, that cultural center will be closing up within the next 3 days, Mr. Irving said irritably. What? Why? Because of the complex. Montrose looked puzzled. What complex? Mr. Irving blew his stack. In exasperation, he recited the whole history of the Greenbush complex leading up to the entire episode with Interflux. Simon held his breath, determined not to interfere, but he noted that his father was fair to both sides, and he never once mentioned who the leader of Interflux might be. And it's all because you wanted a complex with a monorail just like Hypertech! Montrose looked thoroughly chastened. It was obvious he didn't remember wanting anything. He sat quietly for a moment and said, I think it's a shame to bully these poor kids after they've made such a strong stand. Whether or not it was going to be a shame was never part of the decision, Mr. Irving replied readily. No, but Cyril, why can't we say build the new complex and leave out the warehouses so the kids can have their woods? I never did like warehouses. They're boring. The whole point of a complex, said Mr. Irving under tight control, is to have the offices, manufacturing, and warehousing all together. Without the warehouses, you don't have a complex. You have a pile of manufactured goods sitting on the street. Montrose frowned. Well, how about this then? We scale down the warehouses just a touch and leave some of the woods so the kids can still have some natural setting and there'll be a buffer between their property and ours. If we need extra storage room, we can use those empty warehouses in New Jersey. You see, Cyril, you may assume that I know nothing about the state of our company, but I keep up better than you think. I happen to know that we have a lot of empty warehouses in New Jersey. Because they wrote about it in Business Day and you read it on the plane. Well, yes, but couldn't we do it that way, Cyril, please? I know I don't exactly pull my weight in the company, but I do own a lot of stock, and that should count for something. Simon could keep silent no longer. Mr. Montrose, it would be wonderful if you could work it out that way, because that's all Nassau Arts ever wanted in the first place. To keep... All right, Cyril Irving bellowed. If the plan can be changed without problems, we'll let them keep some of the woods. We can even deed it over to them so they don't have to worry about us changing our minds. But, he looked Montrose right in the eye, no monorail! No monorail? No monorail! Shuttle bus or nothing! Take the shuttle bus, Simon prayed silently. If you want a monorail, go to Disneyland. Take the shuttle bus. The president nodded. Okay. Simon leapt to his feet. That's just great. I've got to go make some calls. No! His father thundered. You're not going anywhere until you admit that Interflux is the best neighbor any school could ever have, much better than a certain other flux I could mention. Simon grinned. You've got it, Dad. The final Interflux meeting was held Tuesday at 3:30 in the gym with a record attendance of over 1,400. Student Council Program Director Simon Irving was at his dramatic best as he told the crowd how, just when all seemed lost and the land was a few short days away from expropriation, a near miracle had saved them. In the darkest hour, last-minute negotiations had been convened with none other than the president of Interflux himself, who had flown in especially from Auckland, New Zealand. He was sympathetic to the Interflux cause, and a compromise had been worked out in hard bargaining. We've got the woods! Howled Phil in summary of Simon's 15-minute speech, and the celebration began. No one, not even Dave Roper, was unhappy about dismantling the cultural center and worm shop or vacating lot 1346B. There was nostalgia, but there were no regrets. They're just the tools that shaped our great victory, Phil analyzed. Our great compromise, Sam amended. Our lucky fluke, Simon added. Gee, I'm sure gonna miss that worm store, though, was Dave's comment. A small ceremony was arranged for noon Saturday at which land deeds would be exchanged between Interflux and Interflux, and the whole quarrel would be officially ended. Simon couldn't suppress a grin when he heard that Wendy was going to get her party money back. Kyle Montrose insisted absolutely on staying in town for the ceremony, and Cyril Irving insisted even more absolutely that he stay with family in Fosterville. This was not through any great hospitality, but so that Montrose's behavior could be monitored and, if possible, controlled. It didn't work, though, because on Friday night, after the family had gone to sleep, their irrepressible billionaire tiptoed out of the house and headed for the bright lights of New York City. His absence was not discovered until the next morning, when the family was waking itself up for breakfast. Mrs. Irving was quite distraught, but still much calmer than her husband, who was creating a scene worthy of Karada. Luckily, at that very moment, the doorbell rang, and all three Irvings rushed to answer it. There on the front step stood two uniformed police officers. Between them hung a bleary-eyed Kyle Montrose wrapped in a large police blanket. "Hey, gang," he greeted the family. "He's been a very busy boy," Officer O'Hara said with a big grin. "Let's just say that the people who went to see the big Christmas tree at Rockefeller Center got more than they bargained for last night. And somebody got a free tuxedo," the second policeman added. "I didn't know whether to arrest the guy or thank him," O'Hara went on. "He put smiles on a lot of faces, and isn't that what the holiday spirit is all about?" Mr. Irving hustled his boss in the door. "Thanks a lot, officers. I'm terribly sorry about all of this. Simon, go get a bathrobe so we can give the officers back their blanket." "Yeah, well, so long, Mr. Montrose. Nice meeting you. Don't forget to read all about yourself in the Post tomorrow." When the police had gone, Simon and his mother withdrew discreetly. It was not suitable for them to witness the president and chairman of the board of Interflux being raked over the coals by his subordinate. The ceremony was held out on land lot 1346B, which, courtesy of Antiflux, had been cleared of the Cultural Center worm store and fence. Representing Interflux were Mr. Irving, four of his top people, and Kyle Montrose. Montrose looked much under the weather, and at first Mr. Irving had refused to allow him to attend on the grounds that he was a disgrace. On second thought, however, it was decided him that leaving him alone where he could escape again was far more of a risk than bringing him among humans. So he was there, pale and dazed, under the strict warning from his senior executive vice president that if he tried to make a speech, he would be throttled. Representing Antiflux were the program board, student council president Wendy Orr, and the entire student body of Nassau Arts, some 1,500 strong. They swarmed in front of the platform in a great show of support for their program board. Even Nathan Krupman, who was putting in 20-hour days editing Omni, was right there at the front of the crowd, TC at his side, the two flashing Simon the thumbs-up signal. Also in the audience, Simon could see Johnny Zull beaming with pride for his lab partner in spite of his depression at having no band to play with. Near him was Dave Roper, a little misty-eyed, but otherwise bearing up well. He could also see Barbara, who was now casting her intoxicating green eyes over at T.C. Surratt, and Laura and Peter and all the other students from painting class. Bill McIntosh was there, shepherding the quarter-ton couple. Bill and Dino had a bet on the duration of Mayor Van Doren's speech. If the mayor, who was known to be long-winded, spoke more than 12 minutes, Bill stood to win $750,000. Bill only lost his bet by 8 seconds, and probably would have won had not the scowls of Cyril Irving, the snores of Kyle Montrose, and the boos of the students finally penetrated the mayor's thick skull. He turned the microphone over to Wendy Orr, whose task it was to introduce the program director. This she did with such glowing praise that Simon was beginning to think the next speaker was going to be Albert Schweitzer. But no, it was Simon Irving, and when his name was announced, the air rang with applause and cheers loud enough and long enough to make the Interflux delegation squirm, and even to wake up Kyle Montrose temporarily. When the ovation died down, it was a perfectly poised Simon who spoke to the group. He thanked Antiflux for all their support and told them they could be proud of what they accomplished. Then he thanked Interflux for altering their plans and leaving some of the woods, and for being, in the end, a good neighbor after all. He finished with, "Now, I'd like to turn things over to Mr. Cyril Irving, the Senior Executive Vice President of Interflux, and this may seem a little strange, but he also happens to be my dad." Dead silence hung in the air, to be replaced a few seconds later by confused murmuring as the students absorbed this new piece of information. Phil and Sam started the applause, soon to be joined by a few members of the inner circle out in the crowd. By the time Cyril Irving stepped forward to shake hands with his son and exchange land deeds, the crowd approval was 100%, and the cheering was tumultuous for the father and son all-flux team. Mr. Irving was just about to pronounce the whole affair joyfully over when 3 shrill blasts on a referee's whistle brought the audience back to silence. Suddenly, Miss Glandfield burst through the crowd and leaped up onto the stage. Simon was just about to make the observation that she seemed a touch bulkier than usual when she ripped open her ski jacket to reveal that she was wearing a thick vest studded with several dozen sticks of dynamite, all wired to a special remote control button in her hand. The crowd froze in shock. Everyone on the platform leaped to his feet. All right, you Interflux bullies! You ignored my phone calls, and you wouldn't answer my letters, and now I'm going to show you that you're not invincible! She poised her rigid index finger above the detonator button. Pandemonium broke loose. The spectators all flattened to the ground, and those on the platform threw themselves off, hoping that the side of the stage would serve as cover for the blast. Mr. Irving grabbed Simon under the arms and hurled him bodily off the platform to safety. Dazed, Simon looked up, unable to believe what his biology teacher was doing. Hey! He started to shout, but his protest was cut off by the flying figure of Cyril Irving, who dove on top of Simon in a selfless attempt to shield his son from the explosion with his own body. He landed with a tremendous crunch just as Miss Blandfield depressed the detonator button. There was a click, and a spring-loaded pole popped out of a small door in the front of the vest. At the end of the pole, a red flag unfurled, reading, "Boom!" Tinny recorded music played Happy Birthday to You. The scene was as comical as it was bizarre. More than 1,500 people lay in various flattened attitudes on the ground. Miss Glanfield stood alone on the platform with a boom flag sticking out of her stomach, and on the horizon bobbed the running figure of Kyle Montrose, dashing at top speed in a desperate flight from Ground Zero. He would not surface again for 6 weeks. "There!" shrilled Miss Glanfield in evident satisfaction. "Now you see how vulnerable you are! If this had been a real bomb, there would be no Interflux board of directors, so don't be so smart! Next time, it could be someone who's really crazy!" Cyril Irving stood up, his face redder than Simon had ever seen it. "It was someone who's really crazy! You!" He wheeled to Mayor Van Doren, who was all in a force. "Arrest that lunatic!" It was later agreed among the 1,500 students of Nassau Arts that Miss Glanfield had rewritten all the record books with this one. And as always happened in the Glanfield episode, ultimately, some degree of calm was restored. Even Mr. Irving was eventually convinced that there was no such criminal offense as impersonating a deadly weapon. Only when the crowd dispersed and Simon was walking with Sam and Phil to the parking lot did he have a chance to notice that there were snowflakes in the slightly nipping air. "Now what have I been telling you guys all along?" Phil crowed. "Faith! When we owned the land and needed good weather, we had good weather. How long has Interflux had it? Half an hour? A blizzard!" I wouldn't exactly call a few flurries a blizzard," Sam pointed out. Phil opened the door of the wreck and climbed inside. "Give it time, it'll blizz. The point is, faith." He turned the key in the ignition. No response. He tried again. Nothing. "Oh man, it's the intermittent defect. We could be stuck here for an hour, maybe 2. By nightfall, it was painfully clear that the intermittent defect had become permanent. The wreck would never start again. First off, hey there, Reaper Graham. Glad you're able to tune in for the conclusion of Son of Interflux. As now we move over into the 15th and final chapter. The next week, word came from the dungeon that Phil Baldwin had officially failed to live up to his potential in everything and was no longer welcome to study at Nassau Arts. "I'm allowed to finish out the semester in my academics," he said to Simon and Sam, "but if I come within 30 feet of an art class, they're going to shoot me down like a dog. Coming on top of my wreck, this is a real drag. Thanks a lot, Mr. Copadrick. I hope I get a chance to do something for you someday." There were a lot of smiles, though, in the halls of Nassau Arts, including Johnny Zoll, who had hooked up with a new, really classy band called Doofus. And Dave Roper, who had secured himself a part-time job in a bake shop and was back in the worm game. There was even a smile on the highest space in the school. Bill McIntosh had shaken his writer's block and even has publisher and was now working furiously on a sequel, even as publishers continued to turn down The Legend of the Glass Caves. He had taken a healthy attitude towards rejection, commenting, "Stupidity is a disease. I pity them." The biggest news was that Nathan Krupman had completed the editing of Omni and had already won the Northeastern Student Video Prize. Scheduled for future student competitions in Chicago, Seattle, San Francisco, Montreal, and Cannes, Omni was almost definitely going to clean up across the board, proving that Nathan Krupman was almost as big a genius as he thought he was. The following Monday after school, Simon was dismayed to find a note taped to his locker asking him to report to Karada's office immediately. His first impulse was to seek out TC, but then he remembered Sam's experience when Karada set his office on fire. No TC. He would face this on his own. "Mr. Irving Simon," the artist delivered along with his intimidating gaze, "Karada has been observing you in class lately, and I get the impression that you are a very unhappy person. It is, of course, finishing 5th in the Vishnik competition, which upsets you." Simon shuffled uncomfortably. "Well, sir, I was kind of expecting to do better. I'm sorry. Maybe next year I can—" "I have some news for you, Mr. Simon," the artist interrupted. "Next year you will not win the Vishnik Prize either. You will never win the Vishnik Prize." Simon bit at his lower lip. "But why?" "Let me tell you a story. When I was a student in Lisbon, there was a very important painting prize. Year after year, Karada would try for this prize, but I always lost." "And you learned to live with it?" Simon asked. "No. To this day I still curse the names of those who won in my place, especially those who are still alive. You are entirely missing the point. Your Vishnik entry had 2 ways to go. The judges would see that it was very good, awarded the prize, and I would know that you are a good painter. Or the judges would not have the depth to appreciate its subtlety, place it 5th or 6th, and I would know that you are a great painter. Mr. Simon, you will never win a Vishnik Prize because you are far too good." Simon glowed. "Miss Dixon won by starting with a very ordinary idea and doing exactly what Karada told her to. You, on the other hand, lost because every time I told you how to improve your painting, your mind was already planning the next experiment. And Mr. Stavridis," the teacher raised a huge hand, "Karada does not pretend to understand Mr. Stavridis. He has talent, but where it is going is a mystery. But you, Mr. Simon, you I understand, and I will tell you why. I suspected it at first, and now I am positive. You remind me of... Suddenly great tears rolled down his cheeks to be absorbed by his beard. "You remind me of Karada!" Simon felt that were he to die at that very moment, he would have no complaints. "Mr. Karada, I really—" "Silence!" The tears were gone without a trace, and the artist was on his feet, holding a long, bony finger 1.5 inches from Simon's right eye. "Someday we will work together, but for now, I am Karada and you are not! And if you speak a word of this meeting to anyone, I will kill you as you sleep! So when I see you in class again, you will not sulk! Now go away! Karada has already said too much!" Simon fled the office, hugging the meeting to him like a security blanket. He drove home, but he was sure he could have covered the distance by floating on the sheer energy of the supreme compliment he had received from Karada. He let himself in the front door and was about to call out a greeting when he heard his parents talking upstairs. On his way up to join them, he paused as he realized the conversation was about him. "I'm telling you, that kid is something amazing," his father was saying. "He was running Interflux like a pro." "And don't forget that he's a wonderful painter," Mrs. Irving put in. "Everything we threw at him, he threw right back at our faces. And the leadership potential, those kids at school worship him. He's going to be the best executive Interflux ever had." "But what about his paintings?" "He can hang them in his office." With a smile, Simon tiptoed back downstairs, reflecting that he and his father had covered a lot of ground and had still ended up at progress point 0 on the career question. Well, Cyril Irving, there were still a lot of battles ahead before this war would be decided, but at least now the combatants were identified. On one side, the world's richest and most powerful corporation. On the other, a little talent, a lot of guts, and a 6'8" maniac who thought destruction was all a matter of energy levels. It was going to be interesting. Interesting was the word for it, because for the first time in months, he was actually looking forward to see what was going to happen tomorrow instead of worrying about the many problems of today. It looked like even Wendy Orr might not be a dead issue. Her glowing introduction at the ceremony and her friendly greetings in the hall now made him at least 70% sure that had in fact been a flush in her cheeks at the time he'd mentioned in the scene in Nathan's movie. And even though he'd proved it possible to bungle a third chance, passing up number 4 was right out of the question. Yes, he was definitely going to ask her out again. It was nice to be in the driver's seat for a change, especially for a guy who spent so much time tied up and locked in the trunk. As for the events of the last 3 months, Simon felt strangely removed from it all, as though he had merely watched the whole business on TV. But it had worked out well for everyone. Everyone except Phil. At that precise moment, the loud roar of a defective muffler sounded outside. This was followed by the squeal of brakes and the insistent honking of a car horn. Simon rushed out to see Phil and Sam beaming at him from the front seat of an ancient Dodge Dart. He beamed back, pleased because they were pleased. "Now this is transportation," Phil declared proudly as they took Simon out for a spin. It's a rust bucket par excellence," Sam corrected. "But my cousin's cat's former owner was selling it for only $800. "I thought you guys were broke," Simon said. "That's another thing we came to tell you," Phil said smugly. "I am a man of means. I, who they just threw out of Nassau Arts, happen to have just sold a piece of art." Simon goggled. "Not the cake!" "Of course not. That was terrible. But a highly prominent citizen of the world has made an offer for Technicolor wheat. Simon, you'll never guess who." "Mr. Montrose?" said Simon instantly. Phil seemed annoyed. "How did you know?" "Never mind. I accepted his offer of $1,000 and put Technicolor wheat first-class air mirror registered to his address in Zaire." "Hope it doesn't bust. Where is Zaire?" "Africa, stupid," said Sam. "Oh, that's fine. It's gonna bust. I should have added more toilet paper." "No great loss," muttered Sam. Phil was indignant. "You're just jealous, Sotrius, because I'm a professional artist and you're not. Who bought Traffic Jam, huh? What'd you get for it? A plaque. With that and 50 cents, you can buy a cup of coffee. I talked to Mr. Montrose on long distance, and he seems like a totally cool guy. He couldn't believe that I got booted out of Innovative Arts, so he commissioned me to do a new major project. When it's finished, he's going to pay me $2,500. "You know, Phil," said Simon, "Mr. Montrose can be kind of flaky at times. He's been known to disappear for months. You might not even know where to send the work where it's done." "Sure I will. Interflux. It's the surprise present for your dad to hang in his new office, so don't say anything to your old man. The contract came in the mail yesterday. I'm considering something along the lines of pumpkins and high-voltage electricity. What do you think?" Simon swallowed hard. "I haven't seen the new color scheme yet." So you're over your depression at leaving Nassau Arts?" Phil shrugged. "In all my experience bombing out, I've made one rule. Never look back. Besides, I'm on a roll. You see, I figured out that if I stink at things I show potential for, I should be great at stuff I stink at. Get it?" Sam groaned. "Here we go again." "So last night I was leafing through my mother's Cosmo when I came across this test yourself thing called Do You Have What It Takes to Be a Woman Psychiatrist? And I flubbed that test completely. So now I know exactly what I should be." "A woman psychiatrist?" Sam asked. "No, just a psychiatrist. Don't you see how perfect it is?" "No? Well, think about it for a while. It'll come to you." "Don't think about it," Sam advised. "You'll go crazy." "See," said Phil, "I've got patience already." "Philip, leave poor Simon alone with your lunatic ideas. We're supposed to be showing him the new car." "Mind your own business, Sotrius. Simon is interested in my career planning, and if you were a real friend, you'd be too." "This isn't career planning. This is more stuff you cooked up just to be annoying." "Oh, yeah?" "Yeah!" The car backfired, and suddenly Simon realized that everything was as it should be. When life was bad, it was still better than nothing. And when it was good, a guy might just get lucky enough to end up taking a spin in a 1971 Dodge Dart with two crazy people fighting in the front seat. Sometimes the great organizing principle of the universe wasn't such a bad guy after all. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes Son of Interflux. It remains one of my favorite books to this very day, ever since I first read it in the early 1990s from its library shelf at Meadowbrook Middle School in Fort Worth, Texas. This copy apparently came from a school in Cincinnati after I purchased it online, but it was definitely worth every penny, not that many pennies to be perfect though, for me to finally own a copy again. And any of you that tuned in for even one single chapter of this read session, I'm glad I was able to share it with you. Next week, I hope to start a new book, as we will resume Rowdy Reads. Got a number of possible choices. As you can see from the back of me, from my new setting for Rowdy Reads, I've actually increased my library collection quite a bit these last few weeks. Ordered a lot of new books and been able to stock them up. And I've got a few choice ideas for what I might just be able to do with this. And we'll just wait and see what I decide to choose. First thing, next Saturday. As I pointed out, I believe that from this point forward, Rowdy Reads will be exclusively on Saturday. One session at 6 p.m. Central Time, and then a second one at 7 p.m. I'm actually planning on then possibly rebroadcasting the live sessions of the reads the following day as part of Rowdy Live, which will still be take part regularly on Sunday nights. And I'm thinking I might push up its start time starting next week to 6 p.m. Central Time. Rowdy Live will be at its current regular time, 7 p.m. tomorrow night. It may still be very short, probably just a brief gaming session before we start really preparing for what I have planned to bring the show back to full force and in combination with these Rowdy Reads sessions. So I want to thank the Reaper Graham, Burton Range, everybody who's probably tuned in for this several months long session of reading Son of Interflux. I really did hope you enjoy it, and hope that whatever I choose for the next read will be as equal, if not possibly more enjoyable. I'll see you tomorrow, starting at 7 p.m. Central Time for Rowdy Live. Until then, stay rowdy, my friends.